being recorded, and the recording will be published on the EDC website after the meeting. First, before we get to the formal agenda items, we're going to deal with introductions as we usually do. My name is Neil Cameron. I'm the chair of this committee and I'm a non-executive director of the EDC. Can I turn to the other EDC director first, Lord Moylan, and then we'll go through the other members.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Moylan. I'm also a member of the EDC board.
Thank you. And if we go to the local authority nominated members.
Councillor Eric Hannishead, appointee from Dartford Borough Council.
Lauren.
Councillor Lauren Sullivan, joining me virtually, representing Gratian Borough Council.
Thank you. And the other local authority representative is Councillor Jordan Mead, but he has sent his apologies. So let's go on to the Secretary of State nominated members. Penny Marsh.
Good evening. Yes, I'm Penny Marsh, independent member of the Planning Committee.
Chris Hall, also an independent member of the Planning Committee.
And we also have the officer team. Mark Fullen, the Chief Planning Officer. Would you like to introduce your team?
Yes, yeah, thank you. So around the table today, you might need to hear from Kate Holland, who's the planning consultant and the case officer for the application. Also around the table, Tim Sharp, the legal advisor, Adam Skinner, the committee secretary, Simon Harrison, the head of design, and if there's any strategic Eastern Quarry issues, Caroline Barker's here as planning manager for you.
Very good. Well, after those introductions, we can go on to the formal agenda. We've got apologies for absence, and that, as I've already said, Councillor Jordan Mead sent his apologies. Declarations of interest. Anything in addition to the standing declarations?
None, Chair.
No. Urgent items?
No, not today, Chair, thank you.
Record of the meeting held on the 15th of March 2022. We've got the draft minutes. Can we agree that is accurate, or are there any issues?
Happy to agree.
Yes. Councillor.
Thank you. Just for the noting, and I wonder if this can be included into the minutes here, that this was a committee that was moved to a different time, and had it been on the Wednesday, both Councillor Jordan Mead and myself would have been able to attend. And I think that there wasn't a huge amount of notice of the change of the meeting due to our meetings at Gratian Borough Council, and it just want to flag this as an issue of concern and that this shouldn't happen again. Meetings are in advance. We make every effort to have that clear, and so I just, we have it on the minutes that apologies for absence were here, but that wouldn't have been the case if it had happened at the actual scheduled time.
Thank you. Well, that can be added to the minutes and is certainly noted. And it is undesirable if we have to change the times and members who've made arrangements to attend can't then attend. And in fact, the following evening we did have a presentation at which Councillor Sullivan, Lauren did attend and was there. Thank you. So we then go on to item 5, which is an application for approval of details submitted, reserve matters application for Alkaline South Eastern Quarry. Can I just say on this item that this application has been before us at the previous meeting, but we are considering it afresh today. So this is not a continuation of discussion, but a fresh discussion, and we're going to approach it on that basis. So we're going to follow the normal procedure. We're going to have an officer presentation from Kate Holland for 10 minutes or so, and then we have a speaker registered to speak in support from Redrow, and that is 5 minutes maximum. More than one person would like to speak, that's absolutely fine, but 5 minutes in total. We're then going to have questions of clarification from members of the committee, and that will be to the Redrow team, but also an opportunity to ask officers. And after that, members will debate the application, and there'll be no further opportunity for contributions at that stage from anybody other than members, unless we seek particular clarification. But that's all in accordance with our published procedures. So, having got all that out of the way, can I hand over to Kate Holland, who's going to give her presentation.
So the way I'm going to present this, I'm going to first of all do a recap of the application as a whole, and then I'm going to focus in on the changes since the last planning committee and the reasons for deferral. So this is an application made by Redrow Homes for land at Alkaline South in Eastern Quarry. The proposals are for development of 227 new homes with associated car parking, landscaping and infrastructure. Development includes a total of 42% affordable homes, together with 2 key areas of landscaping, which is a central view corridor and the western edge, bordering the major urban park. This application was reported to the March Planning Committee with a recommendation for approval subject to a number of conditions, including 3 pre-commencement conditions that I'll run through in detail shortly. The application was deferred from committee to seek the applicants to address the pre-commencement conditions, together with providing further information about podium parking and clarity on street lighting. So this is just a slide showing where the site is. The site is outlined in red. To the west, you've got the major urban park. To the north, you've got the market centre, and the south is the Castle Hill Lake. The bits in sort of the greeny colour are the total Redrow land holding. These other 2 parcels of land are future applications, as I say, with the site outlined in red. These are extracts from the Area Master Plan and Area Design Code, which set the parameters and context for the application. The site is located here. The pinky colour here relates to storey height, so that area there is a 2 to 4 storey height, with the remainder of the parcel being 2 to 3 storey. Approximately a third of the site along the western edge is identified to be high density, 60 plus dwellings a hectare, and the remainder being medium density. The middle plan shows the access routes. So the royal blue is the primary street, which links Castle Hill to the east and Ashmere to the west. You've got the view corridor that runs down the centre of the site, which links through, provides a visual link through towards the south, and the sort of lighter blue colour is the secondary street, which provides a secondary access through the site, through the major urban park into Ashmere. And then the slide on the picture on the right hand side is just showing the character areas. The site falls solely within the Alkaline South character area. So in terms of layout, this is the previous layout that was presented to the committee. In general, the layout remains the same, so it's planned useful to sort of show the context of the site. So the main access is provided to the east along the secondary street, which forms part of the application. You've got a secondary access up in the northwestern corner that primarily serves the northwestern apartment blocks and the street that runs along the north of the site. There's an emergency access that runs through the parking areas. Here it's got bollards in it to stop general usage, but it would be open in case of emergency. Through the centre of the site is the view corridor. This is a landscape-led space which has a pedestrian and cycle route running along the shared private drives along the eastern side. There's 8 apartment blocks along the western edge. They're all 4-storey with surface car parking. The remainder of the site is housing of a 2, 2.5 and 3-storey height. There's no frontage access, vehicular access onto the primary street. All the parking to these properties is to the rear. So the next 2 slides provide images of the houses. The scheme aims to articulate character through 2 design languages, the pent being used for the primary streets and view corridor, and the pinch to articulate the east-west laneways. The top image is a street scene from the view corridor. The dwellings are constructed of white brick with black weatherboarding as a link to the chalk cliffs. The dwellings are of a 3-storey form, offering enclosure to the landscape space. The middle and the bottom image are the dwellings in the pinch. They are red brick with white weatherboarding, and they're generally of 2, 2.5 storey scale. This building here is an apartment block, just showing the street scene leading up to the major urban park. These are the dwellings on the primary street, once again of a 3-storey form, providing scale to that main route. In general, the house types give good consideration to the local vernacular, and considerable amount of design work is taken to develop the design of the houses, and these haven't been changed since the previous committee. There are the 2 main areas of landscaping. As I said, you've got the view corridor running down the middle and the western edge, which borders the major urban park. I'll just talk about the view corridor now, because I'll come on to the western edge in a little bit. So the view corridor is a concept designed by the applicants to provide an area of green space through the centre of the development. This will provide a range of landscape spaces, including seating and informal play. The eastern side through the private drives would include an on-street pedestrian and cycle route, drawing users down from the market centre down towards the lake through the site. The space has been organised to locate trees to the edges of the space to allow views down through the site towards the south, in accordance with the aspirations of the design code. In principle, this space is welcomed, has been well considered and laid out. So now I'll move on to what's changed since the previous committee and what was the reasons for deferral. So, as I said, the application was reported to the March 2022 Planning Committee with a recommendation for approval subject to 3 pre-commencement conditions. These sought to address matters that have not been fully resolved during the course of the application and required further update. The conditions related to resolving a boundary treatment along the western edge, removing a set of railings and replacing those with a hedge, and updating the secondary street boundary details, which is along here, to walls with railing above. Architectural detailing relating to the elevations that I've highlighted with the orange images, orange lines, sorry, and the roof forms the 2 blocks to the south that I've marked up with stars, if you can see those. And addressing issues relating to the layout of the Northwestern parking court, which I've circled in blue, and the ability to landscape parking courts more generally. At the Planning Committee, members asked for more information relating to the viability of podium parking in the northwestern corner, because there had been a comment before that the applicants had advised podium parking was not viable. And further information was sought in respect to the certainty of placement over street trees and lighting. So first one was easy to address. This is the boundary treatment along the western edge and the secondary street. Just to confirm, that's now being replaced with hedging along the western edge and the walling and railing as required by the condition. So the next few slides run through the amendments that have been made to the design of the apartment buildings. I've circled the changes for clarity, and in all slides I've tried to show the previous elevations and the proposed amendments. As members will recall, the applicants had worked hard on the design of the apartment buildings prior to the previous committee, but there were areas of less resolved elevations. So since the time of the previous committee, the applicants have worked swiftly and positively with the EDC officers to improve the elevations of the apartments, and the resulting scheme is now very well designed, distinctive, and responds well to the character and narrative in its context. So in terms of Block A, feature brickwork panels have been added to the end elevation facing onto the park, where these were previously blank, and the entrance to the building has been inset rather than projecting, which adds a visual relief to that elevation. Block B, which is the same design narrative, is similar with some additional recessed brickwork, detailing around the entranceways being widened and insets give it more visual interest. And then on the next page, there are some more inset balconies to add visual relief, and again the entrance has been inset. Block C, I haven't put circles on this because actually there's been quite extensive changes to the elevation. So this is the elevation, this rear elevation is the one that's needed to be changed. Significant areas of decorative panelling have been added around the windows to uplift the appearance of the elevations. Windows in the central bay have also been enlarged to reduce the amount of walling. So these are very recent changes that have come in end of last week, so they won't have been in the pack that members saw that were presented by the applicant, so these are even further changes. Block D follows the same narrative and is benefited from the same changes. Again, it's the rear elevation which has benefited from the amendments. So you've got the same decorative panelling and enlargement to the windows in the central bay. Block E, you've had substantial numbers of decorative brickwork panels being added to the sides and rear elevation. Key change is the flat roof shown on the side elevation has been changed to a pitch. And that fronts onto the major urban park and really enhances that roofscape. Block F, there's been vertical boarding added between the windows. Decorative brick panels have been added to the brick elements of the building. And then again, blocks G and H, I haven't circled because again, substantial changes to these blocks. The issue here was whether the design narrative had been successfully drawn through into the design of the building, and there were concerns that the two elements of the block, so these two elements related well to each other or not, and whether they sat well together. There have been substantial changes to the blocks to provide a grid-like pattern to the windows, the appearance of larger openings, the inclusion of the mono-pitched roof, and these two buildings really now are distinctive in their setting and provide those gateway buildings into Alkaline South as they flank either side of the secondary street. So this is Block F, which again you can see is a similar design language. And then I've just included this slide, which shows this is the view from the major urban park looking towards Alkaline South. So this is the major urban park frontage. So you can see blocks A and B here, C and D, E and F, and G and H. And these are some CGI images that the applicants have provided showing what those blocks look like. This road here is the secondary street running through the major urban park into the development. So now I'll come on to the Northwestern parking court. So this has been the subject of extensive discussions during the course of the application. On reporting the application to the previous planning committee, officers were satisfied that surface car parking could be acceptable in this location, subject to the design of the surface car park being satisfactory. At that time, the design was parking dominated with limited areas of landscaping within the parking courts, and a pre-commencement condition was therefore proposed to require further landscape design work to this area of the site. The condition also extended to other parking courts where there was concern sufficient landscaping might not be able to be achieved between or within the parking courts. Members requested further clarification as to why podium parking is not viable to the northwestern corner of the site, despite this being the preference expressed by EDC officers. In response, the applicants provided a note to explain the reasons why they're not pursuing the podium parking. And these issues relate to site slope, which the applicants have provided some cross sections. There's insufficient change in levels of the existing site as it's been sort of landformed to make the podiums feasible, as a level change of approximately 4 metres is depth across the plot is required for the podium. It would mean the ground floor level of the apartment blocks would be inactive space, so there would be an element of the car park extending out of the ground, so that would not allow the major urban park to filter into the base of the blocks, and that it wouldn't be possible to provide individual front doors to the apartments, which the applicants consider to be a benefit. In respect to viability, the applicants have clarified that this is an issue of design, viability, feasibility, rather than a monetary issue. Officers consider podium parking could be achieved by a further change in the ground levels. However, this is the design of the surface car park now shown here on the left-hand image, which has been substantially and significantly improved since the previous planning committee, providing a much more organic form, projecting landscaping into the space, which allows the major urban park to wash into the car parking area, which is in line with the AMP vision. And therefore, it is considered this surface car park on balance is acceptable in this location and is in accordance with the AMP. The applicants have also updated parking courts to blocks F and G to provide a similar type of space, featuring changes in paving and a softer layout. This car park would also be partially visible from the major urban park, and therefore this update is also welcomed. In respect of the other parking courts, EDC officers are satisfied that soft landscaping can be provided between the different parking courts, and that a balance has been struck within the spaces between providing parking and adequate landscaping. And then the final slide is this one, which shows that western edge and how it's developed from the March layout into this April layout with the Northwestern car park here, and the other car park I referred to down here. And then I just leave you with this final image from the major urban park.
Thank you very much. We'll hold fire on any questions for the moment, and we'll hear from the applicant. If whoever's going to speak would like to come and sit at the table, it's probably easier for you and easier for us. I'll let you introduce yourselves and fire out time. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Jo Baker. I am Senior Planning Manager at Redrow. I want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application. David Banfield, who spoke previously, fortunately can't be here this evening. As members will recall, and as Kate's covered, the application was deferred from last month's meeting because members were unconvinced that the design of the apartment blocks and the parking courts could be dealt with by condition. Since the last meeting, I think we'd agree that our architects and landscape architects, supported by the wider consultant team, have worked closely with EDC officers to amend the blocks and parking areas. In our opinion, the revised drawings demonstrate excellent design and are supported by officers. This position has resulted in the pre-prototype conditions being removed. I think that demonstrates that officers are now satisfied that the elevations and parking courts are sufficient to allow the application to be approved. Brogan Brass will say a few words as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jo. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm almost, I guess, where we are now, just to build on Jo's words and to emphasise what Kate said, the team has worked really hard over the last month. I think a month ago we thought this would be a tall order, but we've all worked positively and collaboratively. And I think ultimately that really demonstrates Redrow's commitment to really building homes for the Garden City, which is something we feel should be applauded. As Kate said, we fully addressed the pre-commencement conditions, the three matters relating to elevations, landscaping and boundary treatments. In addition to this, we've also streamlined the schedule of conditions. This has gone down by 4 or 5 conditions, and a number of the conditions have turned from ones where we've needed to submit information to points of compliance only. So we have been working hard over that time. Just really to emphasise, as explained in Kate's presentation, the proposal to bring forward an outstanding, high quality, sustainable, inclusive new residential community at Alkaline South within an attractive landscape setting, which is really key to what we're doing. And importantly too, just to sum up, we are in total compliance, or we even exceed the policy requirements, the AMP requirements, the AMP vision, all the outline, all of those different elements of the outline planning consent, and there are a wide number of benefits which come forward as part of the scheme as well, principally things around family housing, affordable family units as well, which is supported by Dartford, which can't be overlooked as well. So I think ultimately, I hope you can see we're all really proud of the proposals, and the CGIs speak for themselves, and we really hope that you share that view with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to questions from committee members. Who would like to Would we like to ask any questions of the applicant team or also to Chris?
A question for the officers, if I may, Chair. I understand the point about the over provision in this parcel of the affordable. Does the 106 say anything about the affordable mirroring the market in terms of the size? What concerns me is the preponderance of flats in the affordable relative to the market. I wonder whether is the section 106 silent on that, or does it offer some assistance?
It does allow for flexibility. It does talk about the mix reflecting the market housing mix. The affordable housing is something that we did have quite a lot of discussion with Dartford Borough Council in relation to the affordable housing and the market housing, and whether the affordable housing mix was acceptable. What the applicants are doing is over providing in the affordable rented units against what the Section 106 requires, and actually updated the housing mix during the course of the application to provide more affordable rented houses, which then satisfied the Dartford housing officer. The applicants have also provided a letter of support from the affordable housing provider in relation to the shared ownership units to prove that there is support and that they can sort of they are suitable for the site. So yes, there is a higher percentage of apartments. Dartford, when I spoke to them, generally said, we need affordable housing. If the affordable housing provider is happy with this number of apartments, then that's fine. They're happy with the number of family affordable rented units. And also it's a phase where there's a high density edge to it, which really does lend itself to a higher number of apartments. So yeah, we did do quite a lot of work on that as part of the application.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Anybody else?
Could I ask about planting? You've got this view corridor, which is quite extensively planted, and you've introduced new planting into car parks to soften the appearance. But how high maintenance or low maintenance is this intended to be, and who is going to maintain it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be a management company set up, which is the same for other developers across Alkaline. So that's going to be a Camland entity, which will be responsible for maintaining the bulk of the landscaping. The landscaping specific to the parking courts, which are within the ownership of the affordable housing provider, that will be managed by the RP. So that will be the registered provider. It will be their responsibility to manage the landscaping.
So what, I'm not saying they would, and I don't know who the RP is, but so I'm not making any aspersions against them, but what has to stop them once it withers and fades, just getting rid of it? Or
There should be a planning condition, I imagine.
Well, you can't, of course, a planning condition years later on an RP about what goes on in the car park. Practice.
The application was, do you want to jump in, Mark? I mean,
Okay.
there's a landscape management plan submitted with the application, which sort of sets out how each of the areas would be maintained, and anything that obviously is within that highway land would be maintained by highways. I imagine, I'm not 100% okay with the outline plan question, but presumably there is a condition relating to managing landscaping for at least a certain number of years after it's installed.
There's a condition about implementing within the first planting season, but generally the ongoing landscaping captured within the individual reserve matters for the specific landscaping for that scheme. So,
yes, my question is, that's all very helpful, but I haven't actually had an answer to my question, which was about whether the chosen landscaping was going to be high maintenance or low maintenance. So there are things you can plant that need a lot of looking after, and there are things that you can plant that don't need a lot of looking after. That's what I'm trying to get at. And because we're approving it, and it's a crucial part of it, but if after 5 or 6 years our whatever period you choose after implementation, it's all sort of gone. And the RP says, well, we can't put this on service charge because it's our tenants can't afford to pay this. And if the management company, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So where are we dealing with the practicalities of making this sustainable? You're not coming with the detailed landscape plan tonight.
Unfortunately, our landscape consultants aren't here at this meeting today. They were at the previous meeting last month. One would assume that being landscape consultants, they would have specified suitable planting.
Well, I'm sure they've specified suitable, but suitable for what?
Does it require a high level of maintenance, knowing it's going to be in a communal area? Maybe this is something which we could supply further details of if that would be
We
comfortable.
should probably try and get into a system of
Yes.
the applicants and then
Because what concerns me is that from the applicant's point of view,
Sorry, Donald, our landscape consultant, is on the call.
Oh, I beg your
realise, so
pardon.
he should be able
I beg your
to.
pardon.
Donald could provide a detailed response to that.
Thank you.
Hi there, good evening everyone. Am I okay to reply now to the question?
Yes, can you reply briefly as you can?
Okay.
And directly.
Yes. Directly, the planting pallets are developed from the EDC Planting and Public Realm Design Guides. So what we are specifying is tried and tested across Host Fleet and across other commercial sites of a similar nature. So there's nothing that is onerous or too difficult. It's tried and tested and it's influenced by the Host Fleet Public Realm Design Guide.
So it sort of becomes a question to the officer, since you wrote the guide that he's implementing, he's passed it back to you. Do you have the answer to the question?
Well, yes, absolutely. I've got an answer to the question. I think we should just get the developer questions done.
Yes,
okay.
and then we'll deal
And
with
then we can
Right.
talk to officers.
Okay, and we've also
I've definitely got an answer for you, Danny, that's fine.
we've also got condition 5, which requires further details to be submitted. But any other, Lauren, Councillor Lauren Sullivan, you've got a question.
Hi, yes, thank you. My question, and apologies if this was covered last meeting, is about the van spaces and the general number of parking spaces in general. Are we saying that van drivers and self-employed people are not welcome on this site because there's no space for them? Also in the 6.104, says about the majority of affordable homes will have unallocated parking spaces. So this kind of leads me into thinking of, will it be tenure blind or whatever that the phrase is for affordable homes, and knowing or not whether an affordable home is that one? So kind of two kind of questions on that, van spaces and why there was no decision to have allocated van spaces as we can see them plaguing many of us, and about the total number of spaces that have been provided. Just to follow on that garden street with flowers and stuff going down there, I can just see it in almost 10 years time. There's not enough parking spaces. People have parked on the grass, as that's a common complaint that I get as a councillor. And the image that you have of it, it just lends itself to that. And I wonder if there's any ideas of protection of that space so that parking isn't there on that site, which you see is a main focus of your area.
I think some of those questions are probably best dealt with by officers, but I'll let the applicant respond.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. I'm Brendan Weaver from ARAC. I'm a transport consultant on behalf of Redrow. So taking each of those points in turn, I'll deal with van spaces first. So the level of car parking we're proposing and van parking overall is in accordance with the, well, it is in the context of, I should say, the Educated Sustainable Transport or travel strategy, I forget the exact name, and the Alkaline adopted parking management plan. Those two documents are slightly in contradiction with each other, one setting an upper level desire, one setting a lower level desire. So we've sought to strike a balance between the two. One of those points of balance is on van parking, where the sustainable travel strategy doesn't seek particular van parking. So we've taken the position that we would provide effectively a mix of on-street parking, which can be suitable for smaller vans. And indeed, I've undertaken my own primary research a number of years ago into van parking at Ebbsfleet, where we found that the vast majority, by which I mean well in excess of 90% of vans that we found at Ebbsfleet were, and this goes beyond just Ebbsfleet, this goes across Gresham and Dartford as well, were of car size. Obviously, there are long base vehicles, so we're not in any means suggesting here that those types of vehicles are not welcome. They are. There is space for people that work in those particular trades, etc. What we did find was that there was a degree of self-selection with those people that have longer vans choosing to live in homeless tandem parking, where you can park longer vehicles across two spaces, say. So that's the van parking point. The second point was around space tenure, I believe. So again, this strikes the balance between the two documents, where there are also market pressures on either side. So while one is looking for perhaps 1.5, 2 spaces per dwelling, and other is looking for effectively below 1 space per dwelling, we try to push those as far as we can within principles the markets will bear. So from a private market perspective, I think we have typically with flats, for example, 1 space per dwelling. For houses, we have typically, for 3 beds, are typically 1 or 2 spaces per dwelling, and for 4 beds, I think are typically 1.5 to 2 spaces per dwelling. And then for the affordable flats, we've pushed that down to 0.7, which is as far as the market will bear on the advice of officers, that we should try to push that down as far as we can in terms of parking overall.
I don't think you've answered the question on whether the spaces are allocated or not, but presumably for flats you take a different approach to housing. I don't know, but perhaps you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the private flats, spaces would be in principle allocated to individual dwellings. For the affordable, they would be allocated to the block and then managed by the registered provider to restricted to only those people within those blocks. For houses, most parking is on plot, where parking is in courtyards. For houses where there are some examples of that car parking, I think, is exclusively for affordable tenure dwellings. I think I may be incorrect, but I will stand corrected if I'm wrong. But they are again unallocated, and it will be for the RP to manage through allocating permits.
Right, thank you. Well, I think that, unless anybody's got any other specific questions for the applicant, what I'm now going to do is to let the officers address some of those points as well, because I think, Mark, you'd like to do that. Any other specific questions for the applicant from anybody? No? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, turn to the officers.
Perhaps, yes, so I just thought we should just provide a bit of structure and clarification. Yes, just to come back on the question you particularly raised this. So the Alkaline Planning Commission has a requirement for maintenance and management of landscaping for 5 years after the implementation of that landscaping. So the landscaping is agreed through the reserve matters. As Caroline pointed out, that's then implemented in the first planting season, and then there's a period of 5 years that then kicks in. 5 years is a typical period to assume that by that period, by the end of that period, that planting should be established. We do carry out audits, either undertaken internally or by our landscape consultants, and then we are making sure that the landscaping that is on the approved plans is then being implemented. And if things are dying, we are tending to get the landscaping that is implemented sort of checked on an annual basis. In terms of the landscaping that's on the drawings, yes, that obviously has been assessed against the public realm strategy. It's also been assessed by a company called CSA Environmental, who are the landscape consultants that work on behalf of EDC and include on planning applications. So yeah, and when the public realm strategy was done, it wasn't only looked at on the basis of what looks pretty, it was looked on the basis of what is manageable, what is good maintenance, just to make sure that the planting that is going in is suitable for the climate, for water resilience, for appropriateness of the area, rather than just necessarily things which might be look nice but wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. So I think that all of the...
But you haven't addressed the question of cost.
No, so the cost would be covered by the service charge and then go to the management company.
No, my question is, to what extent does the design of the landscape reduce the cost of maintenance? Yes. As I said, you can plant things that are very expensive to make, and you can plant things that more or less look after themselves. Now, my question is, to what extent is cost of maintenance taken into account in deciding the planting? Because it's all very well to say it's going to go on the service charge, as if it was some sort of mythical bucket in which anything can be thrown. But people have to pay the service charge. And there comes a point when they argue about the service charge. And then we don't pay that. Why are we paying for that? Why are we paying all this money just to have more azaleas put back that we never liked in the first place, or whatever it happens to be, and so on. And so the landscaping deteriorates as part of a to and fro, if you like, between the management company and tenants. So to what extent is the financial sustainability of the planting, including in car parks, which I'm glad to see it there from a design point of view, a consideration when you come to approve the plans?
Simon, you worked on the public realm strategy. So.
I did, yes. So when the public realm strategy was produced, a lifetime costing exercise was undertaken. So we understood how much it would cost to maintain. We tested that with Kent County Council and their adoptions team to make sure they were happy with the cost of maintaining that level of planting. We didn't test it with the developers, I accept that, but we tested with KCC as effectively a proxy for the affordability of maintenance of the planting. So that gave us comfort that it was affordable to maintain within the public realm, and if it was affordable to maintain in the public realm, it will be affordable to maintain across the whole of the Garden City area. As to your point around whether after 5 years that becomes too expensive and can be removed, well, I think that is a valid concern, and I don't think we've necessarily got any mechanisms to prevent that.
No, but one of them would be to try and ensure that when you approve the planting, it's stuff that isn't likely to need lots of replacement after 5 years. That factor that I was trying to tease out as to how aware you were of it and how it affected when you come to approve the planting strategy as a reserved matter under delegated powers, I presume. That would be a factor in your consideration.
Yeah, obviously on the basis that we are monitoring that for 5 years, then the planting should be established by that point, and therefore at that stage there is then less likelihood of things dying and then having to then having to then replace things. Sorry, I don't think I'm answering your question, am I? But I'm struggling to answer it. So
I'm obviously not making it.
Try again.
No, it's all right. I think I've got the picture. I just want to know how. I don't think the answer is that, if it's provided it's maintained for 5 years at the expense of the residents. So we choose something that might be terribly expensive to look after. We establish it for 5 years. The residents are required to pay for it. At the end of 5 years, it'll all be beautiful. It'll be lovely. We won't have to do anything with it again. It's established. That's the answer to the question. It's not the answer to the question, is it?
No, then obviously
things need cutting, trees need pruning. Work needs to be done. And the fact that it's established doesn't mean that it's necessarily, it depends what you're planting to some extent.
Is it going to jump in? Is it in a way that it's embedded from the outset? And if you're considering the lifetime sustainability, and you know what you're doing in one way you're planting, in the southeast of England on chalk, you pick species which are appropriate, and that have been appropriate and lifetime. You're building in a cost-effective planting regime from the outset, or is that just too simplistic?
You can take that into account for sure, but there's still a cost implication for that. And I would accept that there is an increased cost element for the quality of planting that we are seeking in Exley in order to create the Garden City quality of planting, and in order to give comfort, to KCC, particularly at that point, we did this costing exercise to give comfort that it was able to be maintained in perpetuity. And I think there's an issue around design quality, making sure the quality of planting is there from the outset, and there's an issue around stewardship, which I think you're rightly tackling and addressing. And I think as to whether we take that into account, do we take the ability to maintain that in perpetuity? We've used that lifetime costing exercise. That's the mechanism we're using to give comfort that it can be maintained at a reasonable level. But it's still more expensive than a basic level of planting that we often see in most developments across Kent. It's a high quality of planting.
The question is that when you're approving planting details, are you turning your mind not only to will it look good within the first 5 years, but can it be sustained? And a factor of can it be sustained is it feasible to do so?
Yes, so there's a management plan included in every planning application, and we review the management plan. So the landscape architect, CSA, will review the management plan, and in order to make sure that that is a feasible management.
Well, that's the point. Do they look at feasibility as well as attractiveness? So it's long-term attractiveness, and indeed it's an element of sustainability.
Well, that's the point we can pick up with CSA. We haven't obviously got them here tonight as to the extent that they pick that point up. I can't speak on it.
I'm confident that they do pick that up, but obviously there's always a risk of the fact that after 5 years, the ability for planning to control some of this stuff will fall away, and then if the residents are then involved in leading the management company, they may decide to be changing that sort of thing, and there is a limitation to what we as a planning authority can control the risk.
Lauren, I think you've got a question.
Thank you. Yeah, just to weigh into that a little bit. Did you also, Simon, talk to Dartford Borough Council, because they, or Gravesham, for either one, it doesn't really matter. They're the ones that usually do the grass cutting and maintain kind of housing estate areas, to give an idea of.
Yeah. So the public realm strategy was developed as a series of workshops, and both Dartford and Gravesham were invited along with KCC. They didn't attend all of them, but they attended some of those workshops, and then we shared the draft version with Dartford, Gravesham and KCC, and got endorsement of the public realm strategy from Dartford and Gravesham authorities.
When was that?
2018.
Okay, thank you. And I just wonder about what Daniel, you were saying. Are you I wonder where you're going with your questioning, and whether what's the alternative that you think is an interesting point there. It's probably, maybe I'll come back to Jack.
I'm clearly not going anywhere.
Well, are you saying get rid of the park and just have more houses there?
I am asking about the sustainability of these of the planting and the expense of doing so, bearing in mind that it's going to fall upon the residents by way of service charge, and that extracting service charges is going to become difficult, potentially.
Okay.
And therefore, not maintaining the planting might be a way of reducing the burden on the residents. Yeah. So one wants to think about that, so that you have what I started by asking is low maintenance type planting that doesn't need a lot of expense in order to keep it going. And all I want to know is where in the officer's thinking does that consideration arise? Or initially I asked the question of the developer, of course, but the developers have pushed it back onto the officers, and they willingly accepted the ball. So where they haven't disagreed, so they've taken it. I'm asking to say where in their thinking does that arise? And the answer is, Kent County Council have you. But,
Yeah.
you know, it may or may not be convincing to other members of the committee.
I just
Can
had,
sorry, look, you
Neil.
carry on.
sorry, just I wanted to jump in there. The question I had was about the secondary streets actually, and on this picture which I see, I don't see cycle routes or like segregated cycle routes. I just wanted to be assured if that was the case or not the case.
Okay.
Yeah, so the secondary street, it's a bit of a detailed one because the red line for the reserved matters goes just on the edge of the carriageway, and it doesn't include the footway on the southern side of the road or the eastern side of the road, and that is the side of the road where the cycleway is going to be provided when the next phase comes forward.
Right, thank you.
Good. Can I just ask on landscaping? We've got condition 5, and condition 5, which is recommended, appears to assume that further details are going to be submitted with condition, which requires further details to be submitted and approved by the planning authority of landscaping. So is it at that stage that these issues can be considered and should be considered?
Well, I took that into account in my question, essentially. It's not for today. I fully appreciate we haven't got a landscape plan today, but it's a reserve matter in conditions. The officers will be on a delegated powers to do it.
Conditions typically.
Yes, so that's why I was asking how you can read it.
No, I mean, it's a very helpful challenge, so we can certainly look at that and be aware of that when that condition is done. But I suppose just to try to give some comfort that we were using, KCC and I think the engagement CSA that says at the time when the public realm strategy was done to use those as sort of helpful people to feed into things around sort of maintenance and cost. And the CSA continue to be involved. So I certainly I'm expecting them to be considering sort of maintenance as part of that, but obviously we don't have financial viability information, financial sort of service charge information submitted with the information, but we can certainly consider that part of the condition discharge.
It's long-term sustainability if we're going to create an attractive garden city.
Yeah.
Lauren, I think you've got another question.
Thank you. Another question, slightly separate. Have the officers got any examples of where a scheme or a housing estate that has been designed in a similar fashion, where you've got areas where you've got parking behind houses? And I know the police are putting their report. The areas that I have in my ward where we have segregated parking spaces without that overlooking, that it can become antisocial and all that sort of stuff. There's kind of issues there. In these newer estates, I obviously am less familiar with it. Are there examples of these type of housing arrangements with parking pockets elsewhere in the country that doesn't have those antisocial behavioural problems?
Yes, would you like me to ask? Yeah, thanks, Laura. So within the Sustainable Travel Strategy, we actually do have some dedicated design guidance on parking courts, and that guidance is taken from other guidance around the country and from studying successful examples of parking courts. So the key requirement is typically we set a maximum of 6 to 8 dwellings being served by a single parking court, so keeping them small helps to minimise the number of people that are accessing them, and therefore improves a sense of ownership and deters people from entering them. So that's the first point. Secondly, of course, is providing a certain level of surveillance over those parking courts, so trying to avoid rear fences that are too high, and making sure there's generous levels of glazing at first floor, and then also trying to include a decent amount of planting, yet again, more planting, but in order to kind of create a quality of space within those car parks so that when the cars aren't in them, they also actually attractive places for children to actually be able to use those car parks and kick around in those parking courts as well and use them as an informal play space. So, which again, if you've got people using them, your kids using them, again, it's activity, it's eyes on the street, it's helping to deter people antisocial behaviour, etc. in those places. So there's a limit to what we can do. Certainly parking courts aren't our preferred approach to parking, but they are an acceptable part of the parking strategy in a mixed approach to parking.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Simon.
Any other contributions, questions, contributions, comments? No, anything else officers would like to add?
Just to draw members' attention to the supplementary report, which I know has some amended conditions.
Yeah. Right, but if there's nothing else, we can, no other contributions, we can move to a decision on this. So we have a recommendation for us for approval of the details that have been submitted. So I'm going to propose that we make a decision in accordance with the recommendation.
I agree with that.
Any other contrary proposals?
Agree.
No. Well, we can have a formal vote on it, but I'm hearing that people agree with the recommendation. Anybody who... So, Penny.
Apologies, I was just agreeing.
Anybody who disagrees?
Did I jump the gun?
Or who abstains? No, so we're all agreed. Thank you. And I think we should thank the applicant for producing the further details so quickly. And it all shows that it was a better idea to produce the details required at the time of consideration rather than to seeking to have those matters reserved for further consideration. You've probably got your decision quicker as a result. So thank you for that. So that was agenda item 5. Item 6, delegated items report,
Yes.
which is for information, I think.
It is information, yes. So just 7 items on that short report, just covering March. So you have to take any questions as usual, otherwise you have action to make.
So have we got any questions on the delegated items? No, noted. We have with that. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think that brings our meeting to an end. So thank you for attending, and thank you once again to the applicant for their presentation. Thank you.